The Alien franchise is one of my favorite film franchises of all time, most notably because it contains two of my favorite films ever made. Also, it was Alien Day a few weeks ago on April 26th, so I got to see the original film by Ridley Scott in theaters for the first time. Awesome experience. Additionally, we have Alien Romulus, the latest film in the franchise, coming out this August. Very excited for that. In fact, I would say it's probably my most anticipated film of the rest of the year. So what better time to take a look down memory lane and rank all 8 films in this franchise so far, from worst to best. As always, this is going to be completely subjective, my list. You're probably going to disagree with a few of these picks. This video will contain spoilers for all 8 of these movies. We're talking the original 4, the Alien vs. Predator shit, and the prequels. I have a lot to say, so I'm just going to make a bold prediction here and say this video is probably going to be on the longer side. Kicking off the list, smack dab in last place, is Aliens vs. Predator Requiem. An absolute piece of shit. The only good thing I can say about AVPR is that the practical monsters seem to be quite well made. You can't see them for about 90% of the movie because the lighting is atrocious. We finally get to see a xenomorph mixed with the DNA of a predator in the form of, I think it's being dubbed the Pred-Alien. I don't know, that's the only thing I've seen people call it. The design is pretty sick, but we don't really see it do much until the final battle with the one predator that's featured in this movie. That's right, we get one predator. And when this fight does eventually happen, the film constantly cuts away from it, and it's pitch black and raining, which only further obscures visibility. I'm already going off on a tangent. The creature effects, pretty decent, but that's about the only positive I can come up with for this film. Otherwise, it feels like a god-awful fan fiction in which xenomorphs infest a small town and predators, or I should say one predator, is dispatched to take them out. Most of the characters are teenagers, so of course the main character has a girl he's crushing on, a couple of bullies who pop up to beat him up every once in a while. The whole thing gives off a cheap slasher vibe, and that is just not fitting for an Alien story, or a Predator one for that matter. And in case you do forget we're watching Alien and Predator, there's a character named Dallas. Someone says get to the chopper. I guess that's this film's way of paying tribute to its source material. Requiem is rated R, but I could have sworn that I read that it was NC-17 at one point, or maybe there's another cut out there that's that rating. Regardless, in addition to being dark in a literal sense, this film is also way too dark thematically. Alien and Predator are two very violent franchises, but did we really need to see the Pred-Alien enter a maternity ward, kill a bunch of infants, and pump several chest bursters down the throat of an already pregnant woman, knowing that those embryos will consume her fetuses before killing her? That is just so unnecessary. I'm not saying it wouldn't happen given the nature of these creatures, but there's no reason to show it and there's no excuse for it to be a part of this film. So as a whole, yeah, this thing is atrocious. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to just exclude these AVP movies from your headcanon, so they at least don't mess with the mythology of the series that much as long as you don't overthink it. Number 7, Alien Resurrection. I'm an Alien 3 defender, and I know a large portion of the fan base hates that movie, so I can't really judge anyone who likes Resurrection, but I kind of hate this film as well. It's directed by French filmmaker Jean-Pierre Jeunet, written by Joss Whedon, two visionaries with completely different approaches to the subject matter. No wonder it failed. Jeunet wanted a gritty, serious film, whereas Whedon wanted a lot of jokes and crass, gross-out humor. Which one do you think fits Alien better? I'll give you a hint, it's not the guy who made Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Avengers. So the biggest problem in this film is clearly one of tone, but even if you go into this wanting a comedy, which I'm not sure why you would ever go into an Alien film wanting that, the humor still sucks. Alien Resurrection is like that obnoxious class clown that you knew in high school. It's so loud, overly gory with innards and organs splattering everywhere constantly, and it's just so in your face for no reason. It's set like 200 years after Alien 3, and because they killed off Ripley in the last one, they had to clone her. I can understand that. I suppose if you're gonna bring her back, that's the only way you can really do it. But this is not the Ripley I fell in love with. Her DNA was mixed with that of the aliens during the cloning process, which explains some of her behavior. For instance, she has acid for blood. But I hate this version of her and her personality. First of all, she's completely over-sexualized.
So, who do I have to fuck to get off this boat?
Spends half the movie giving everyone the fuck me eyes. And she even does this to the xenomorphs. She doesn't seem to give a shit about anything anymore, let alone saving humanity from the terror that she originally died trying to wipe out. This commits another egregious sin in that it takes actors that I love, such as Ron Perlman, and somehow manages to make me hate them by shoehorning them into these awful, cartoonish space pirate characters. Winona Ryder is terrible as the android. I just don't buy her as that character at all. I would also argue that Resurrection ruins the aliens by turning them into lab rats. I do like the escape sequence where they kill one of their own so that the acid blood will bleed through the floor. But the Xenos in this movie aren't scary. It goes way overboard with the slime and the reptilian look that they've adopted. With each film, the designers for some reason stray further from Giger's original design, and I will never understand that. And don't even get me started on the newborn. Maybe this idea could have worked, but the design that they went with is laughable. And it thinks Ripley is its mother, yet has this weirdly sexual relationship with her. Gross, disgusting, and not in a good way. Just kill it with fire. If I had to give this movie one compliment, there are a couple of scenes that I like. For instance, the underwater sequence where they're all swimming to get from one end of the ship to the other, and there are xenomorphs swimming and chasing them underwater. Some decent suspense there. There's another scene where Ripley encounters a bunch of her previous failed clones. It's kind of disturbing, once again showing how awful the company is, or I guess in this case, the United Systems military. There's a throwaway line early on that explains how Weyland-Yutani was bought out by Walmart or something. Just another thing to add to the 1,000 reasons why this movie is stupid. To those who like this one, I'll give you this. It's not boring. I even go back and rewatch it every once in a while just to laugh at it, but this movie is obnoxious. It's tone-deaf lunacy. Number 6 is Alien vs. Predator, and believe it or not, I actually don't hate this movie. It's not good, and I still don't consider it canon because it's set on Earth in 2004, which makes no sense in the timeline of the events that we witness on LV-426 in the original Alien. To make matters worse, they throw Lance Henriksen in this as a character named Weyland of all things, but it's not the same character that we see in Alien 3. That's how to confuse your audience 101. But frankly, the movie could have been much worse. Paul W.S. Anderson is a shitty director, but he actually crafts some decent atmosphere with the isolated underground pyramid and the frigid Arctic. This is the only PG-13 movie on the list though, so there isn't much in the means of blood and gore, so it kind of fits in the opposite end of the spectrum from its sequel, and it feels like they had to tone a lot of things down, like the chestburster scene, which feels completely tame and they cut away from it before you really see anything. Most of the characters are paper thin, but again, at least they aren't Resurrection characters. They are paper thin, they make some dumb decisions, but they aren't obnoxious. They didn't make me want to shut the TV screen off. Interestingly enough, I think Predator fans will hate this more than Alien fans because the Predators are kinda done dirty here. One xenomorph literally takes out 2 of them. I mean, these dudes, according to the lore, have supposedly bred xenos using humans as hosts for centuries for the sole purpose of hunting them, yet this rookie can't even kill one? Plus, the last surviving Predator winds up teaming up with our human protagonist at the end. That doesn't really fit what we know about the Yautja. Oh well, at least the practical effects are pretty good, particularly the Queen. She looks extra vicious in this movie. And I do respect that they didn't go the easy route and use CG for all of the alien stuff. Just like AVPR, I think it's nothing more than cheap fan fiction, but at least it's competently made and sporadically entertaining when the creatures do fight. Number 5 is Alien Covenant, the second prequel and the latest film in the franchise. Now, I've gone back and forth on this a lot. It has things that I love and it has things that I hate. And regardless of how you feel about Prometheus, that film took the franchise in a different direction. Instead of outright exploring the origin of the xenomorphs, it explored the origins of humanity with the space jockeys, genetic bioweapons, and philosophical concepts that most Alien fans didn't sign up for when they walked into theaters in 2012. Ridley Scott did receive plenty of backlash for that, and it's clear in this sequel that the studio forced him to return to the alien-centric narrative. Because of that, this feels like 2 completely different films intermittently stirred together. My favorite things in Covenant actually have nothing to do with the xenomorphs. The dynamic between Walter and David, these 2 androids played magnificently by Michael Fassbender, representing good and evil, obedience and disobedience, both created by humankind. One resents its creators and wants to make creations of its own, while the other finds beauty in its blind devotion to them. And the scenes where these 2 try to convert one another to the other side are fascinating. It's all very cerebral, and I can understand that to people that want to see just alien action, they're going to be disappointed. But in my opinion, the alien stuff is where this movie actually falls flat. The film does have plenty of intense birthing sequences. I mean, when the neomorph is bursting out of that one dude's back, that was really intense. But Ridley Scott seems to have forgotten the golden rule of his own 1979 masterpiece, in that you don't want to show your monster too much, and this presents the xenomorph fully in CGI, running around on all fours in broad daylight, So there's no suspense there, especially when you always know where the creature is. The older films would always play with the fact that you can't always see where they're at. They could be hiding in the shadows around any corner. The human characters have some interesting qualities in that they debate faith, luck, and morality. And I never would have expected Danny McBride to be among my favorites. But the protagonist, Daniels, is just generic dollar store Ripley. You can tell that they were trying to replicate her look with this character. It's like they're just scared to give us human characters with new personalities that aren't somehow copying what they've done before. It's also safe to say that these are some of the dumbest characters in the entire franchise. I mean, they wear no helmets on an uncharted planet. They don't even wear masks for that matter, so it's no wonder that they start getting infected with this pathogen like the second they set foot on it. I'll say this, the ending sure sets up something interesting with David acquiring an entire colony of like 2,000 humans to run his experiments on. But unfortunately, it looks like we'll never see where that was headed because the rest of this prequel series was canceled. Overall, Covenant I think is just fine. It has some good things, it has some bad things, and they kind of even each other out. Number 4 is Prometheus, which might actually be the most divisive film on the list, and that's really saying something. Look, it's a flawed movie with some of the same exact problems as Covenant, characters doing stupid things, characters generally being very thinly written, and it also raises more questions than answers. With that said, I think it's a more consistent and cohesive film than Covenant, especially in its exploration of humankind's desire to understand our purpose. Where do we come from, and who or what made us, and why? Having a character like David start to question the value of his own creators works great as a parallel to all these other things that the humans are doing. And overall, I think David just carries these prequels as a whole. From the moment he poisons one of the scientists with that black goo, I was just floored by this character. I love his curiosity and how reckless everyone is to trust him because, well, I mean, they have no reason to distrust androids yet because I guess they've just served humankind without questioning them. I wish Charlize Theron had more to do. She's a great actress, and as the daughter of Wayland, she comes off as a bit wooden and doesn't have much to do. I can also level with the people who were frustrated that we didn't get any xenomorphs. It is off-putting that Scott threw in some creatures that were mutated by the black goo, but never the original variety. For instance, we get worms that were changed by the goo, we get a mutant version of Fifield after he comes into contact with it. It kind of feels like a tease. The movie does have a lot of fascinating philosophical concepts, and it does have some alien-like sequences, like Holloway gets poisoned by the black goo, right? He has intercourse with Shaw, and even though she's supposedly infertile, she suddenly becomes very pregnant. And the entire MedPod sequence where she performs self-surgery to remove this thing, which kind of looks like a precursor to the facehugger, is truly tough to watch. I'm not squeamish at all when it comes to these films, but that sequence still makes me wince. Taking the bronze medal at third place is Alien 3. Now, I uploaded an entire video analyzing this film a few months ago, so it shouldn't be a shock to you if you watched my videos that I really like this movie. And it wasn't always that way. When I first watched all of these movies as a teenager, I always avoided rewatching Alien 3 because it has the least amount of action, but story-wise, I've gained a pretty significant amount of respect for this over the years. And I've noticed that other people actually like this one too, which is ironic considering even the film's director, a young at the time David Fincher, has disowned it. And I don't think it would really make him feel any better if we were to tell him, hey, we actually really like it, because there was so much studio intervention that I don't think the finishing product is what he intended. Let's jump right into reason number 1 why people hate this movie. In the opening scene, Hicks and more importantly Newt are promptly killed, right after Ripley just risked her life to save her at the end of Aliens, so it's understandable that a devastating blow like that is going to piss off a lot of people. As much as I love the ending of Aliens, I've got to say, this just fits the dreary mood of this series, and it cements the idea that these creatures kill and corrupt anything and everything they touch. It adds so much to Ripley's heroic arc that leads to her eventually sacrificing her life at the end in order to keep the alien out of the company's hands. The prison planet that she crash lands on is old, decrepit, and gothic in atmosphere. It's also filled with violent criminals serving out their life sentences, so needless to say, I didn't feel much for a lot of these people when the alien starts picking them off. But they aren't all boring characters. Some are stated to be rapists, murderers, and child molesters, but others have more complex backstories, like Clemens, the medical officer. He's already served out his sentence, which was for accidentally overdosing his patients because of his morphine addiction. Dylan is another character that I like. He has a violent past and no doubt did horrible things, but he's become somewhat of a spiritual leader among the colony, trying his best to atone for his sins and turning to faith for salvation. Yeah, it doesn't at all excuse what he did, and it doesn't make him a saint, but it's definitely interesting to explore. This movie does have some logistical issues as to how the two facehuggers got onto the Sulaco. In my head, I like to think that the alien queen planted them somehow at the end of Aliens before she was killed, but I can excuse the fact that that's left ambiguous because this is the first time we've seen an alien come from a non-human host. It's either a dog or an ox, depending on which cut you watch, because there's the assembly cut and the theatrical. The practical effects in this still look great, but the green screen imposed shots in which they used a miniature puppet do not. The lighting on the alien is all off, it doesn't match with the backgrounds, and there's an ugly green outline to it in all of these as well. But it is funny, I always see people saying the CGI in this movie is bad. It's actually not CGI. They literally filmed a miniature puppet that was controlled with rods, and they ran it across the green screen and then superimposed it over the background shots. It's a shame they couldn't somehow remaster this film and clean some of that up, because I think that would improve it a significant amount. And flaws and all, I think this movie ends Ripley's story in a beautifully tragic, haunting way. At least until Resurrection digs it up and ultimately beats it with the shovel. We've come to number 2, and this is where it gets really tough. I found myself having to choose between what I believe are two perfect movies. One is a claustrophobic, atmospheric, slow burn slasher set in space, while the other is a massive, adrenaline-fueled war film that also has the reputation for being one of the greatest sequels ever made. Ultimately, Cameron's follow-up entry comes in second place, but by a very thin margin. One thing that I find fascinating about Aliens is how many people call this an action film. Don't get me wrong, it definitely does have a lot of action. It's called Aliens plural for a reason. But there isn't a single shot fired until an hour in. Cameron was smart to replicate the tension of the first film here, allowing the suspense to slowly build, allowing us to get to know the characters, and giving Ripley some room to breathe. She was awesome in Alien, but they add a lot of depth to her here. She's plagued by nightmares, is completely stripped of her title and career because no one believes her story, and all of that factors into her decision to accompany the Marines back to LV-426 when the company loses contact with their colony that they have stationed there. The special edition also tells us that Ripley had a daughter who aged and ultimately died during those 57 years that she was floating through deep space in cryosleep. I really wish that was included in the theatrical version because it adds so much more to her relationship with Newt when they eventually find her on the decimated colony. However, if we're going to talk about the different editions, I don't like that the special edition shows us Hadley's hope before it collapses. I think it's so much more suspenseful and frightening when the audience knows no more about what they're walking into than the characters do. Like, for instance, when they first arrive in the dropship, Ripley points out that the colony still has power. I think everyone was holding out a sliver of hope that it was just a downed transmitter, but from that observation, that clearly wasn't the case, and it's kind of this moment of realization that yeah, some bad shit probably went down here. After a massive crescendo of tension, we do finally get the Aliens versus Marines chaos that everyone raves about, and it's fucking awesome. In this movie, the Xenos have more of a hive mentality, which is directly referred to by one of the characters, as well as the fact that we're introduced to the Queen. And I do understand the criticism that the aliens become more bug-like in this film, and that kind of destroys the mystique of how the original alien behaved in this film's predecessor. But I think they're still pretty damn terrifying because they show such extreme intelligence by cutting the power to the base, slipping in through the tightest of crevices, and testing the building's weak points. What the Marines thought would be an easy victory quickly turns into a mission of desperation. We all like to make fun of Hudson, but let's be real, a lot of us would probably be reacting the same way. And from the first attack scene on, this film just builds and builds and gets even better, with Ripley leveling up and facing the Queen head-on at the end. Totally iconic stuff, and I think it builds on everything set up in the first film pretty flawlessly. But for me, nothing beats the futuristic yet industrial feel of the Nostromo's dark corridors. This thing looks like what I'd expect a spaceship to look like, but it still has a very lived-in feel to it. It's not designed for luxury. It's a towing vessel after all, basically a giant space freighter, and the crew members constantly complain about the sizes of their shares. The point is, it's not as pristine as something like the Prometheus. And that opening crawl in Alien that introduces us to the craft and its crew in cryosleep is so good, no doubt inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey. When talking about Aliens, I referred to this film as basically being a slasher in space, which might be a poor description because it's actually so much more. These are not slasher characters. They do have personalities, they have their own specific assignments within the team, and they react differently to the situation presented. Like when they're first assigned to investigate the rogue transmission on LV-426, some of them would rather risk forfeiture of their shares in order to stay on course and just get back to Earth, which is understandable. But I guess it's in their contract to investigate any potential intelligent life, so you can't really blame them for being dumb this time like you could in Prometheus or Covenant. One thing that amazes me, and I saw this in theaters not too long ago, the exterior shots of the derelict ship as the few crew members that go out are walking up to it, these shots hold up so well. I can't believe this was made in '79. And a lot of these shots are like a direct one-to-one of Giger's artwork. The walls of the ship, the field full of eggs. I don't know how they translated it over so well, but they did. And I can't talk about this movie without gushing about the big chap, the lad who started it all as a little facehugger on poor Kane. And at the time, nothing like this had ever been thought of before. It's, as Ash would say, a brilliant design. A parasite that attaches to a host, keeps it alive, and impregnates it with an embryo that will eventually eat its way out of said host once its nutritional needs have been met. And what makes it so scary and violating is that it's, well, very alien and unfathomable, but also not that far outside the realm of possibility. I mean, some species of insects literally do this. They paralyze other insects, plant their eggs inside, and leave them to feast on the host alive. And the craft on display in this film throughout, but particularly during the chestburster scene, is beyond innovative. I think the only gripe I could possibly think of with this whole movie is that the alien somehow goes from being a 2-foot-long worm to like an 8-foot-tall behemoth in what feels like hours. I don't see how that's physically possible, but that's just a nitpick. Alien is just perfect. I mean, seeing it in theaters for the first time, despite the fact that I had already seen it like a dozen times before, and the fact that I was still floored by it, just proves how incredible it is. It is a masterpiece of its time that will never be topped. I really hope they never try to remake this film in the future. And that is my ranking of all 8 films in the Alien franchise, from worst to best. As always, I implore you guys to drop down into the comments and let me know what your ranking is, or at least give me like your top 3. I've got my fingers crossed for Alien Romulus. Fede Alvarez has a pretty strong track record, so I'm hoping he can do for this franchise what he did to Resident Evil. Evil Dead, rather. Based on the teaser that we got, it does look like a back to the basics movie going towards the tone of the original, which definitely excites me. Before you head out, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.